Hello, you beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of the Roaring Agents podcast. Today, I am joined by Paul Kuthe, professional kayaker, best-selling author, and business coach. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I met you through my wife, who is a kayaker as well, not a professional one like you. And she was talking to me not long ago as well as that you helped her learn how to roll.
I remember in the swimming pool over in Vancouver, I think it was a couple of few sessions, which is normal. Everybody, it's a really weird, counterintuitive, strange learning environment and movement to pick up, but she did great.
And my wife's a teacher, for those that don't know. And she said that you were one of the most, how does she put it? Kind is kind of the word, but patient.
Mm,
There's a lot of people who are not patient when they really know something. It's hard for someone, the expert, to back down to the basics and say this and
yes.
this. Is this a natural thing that you have to for that patience and that ability to train at that basic level? I've seen the videos. There's tons of videos of you online doing the sea kayaking, these huge waves and all this.
Right.
Where does that come from?
The patience. Well, I'm not sure exactly. It's something I started teaching kayaking very young because I was able to take a class that was put on by the local community college and whitewater club in Missouri. And so my first experiences were teaching adults as a kid. And it's really easy to be patient when somebody is twice your age, and
Not gonna
they
yell
just
at them.
hold you. They can just hold you underwater if you were mean to them. So you have to develop that. But no, I think the empathy is really at the root of that.
Empathy.
And as we are sort of wanting to lead people, and we're in a space where we have the opportunity, which usually isn't by title. You know, everybody is a leader in some capacity, whether it's with your kids or your local club or at work, even if you don't have the job title. uh, Having two things, the empathy and authority, it's really the combination of both that is so important for a true leader and guide. And so I think that's really where it was. I remember how hard it was. I remember how difficult it felt and how scary it felt. And so that patience, it just comes from that, I think.
So you're a professional kayaker. Briefly tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, so that means like usually at the pinnacle of the sport, you're literally living in a van down by the river, but it is, it is getting more and more popular. But when I was really at the peak of my sort of career in that space, it was usually a hodgepodge of coaching or you could try to put out DVDs, but those went away. Some sponsorship money does exist, but it's hard fought, and the sport, of kayaking and paddle sports is still relatively small, and so it does take quite a bit of effort to make a living at it, but you can do it. And occasionally you sit back and just kind of laugh at because somebody's paying you to do the thing that you would be doing anyway, and it is an exciting lifestyle, but it requires a lot of travel and a lot of weekend commitments and time away from loved ones. So it has that challenge as well. It can be great for the relationships that you form within it because they're usually lifelong and really tight. Your lives are literally in your friends' hands quite often. But does make it challenging to make a lot of connections outside of that because people don't get it. It's a weird thing, and you're off in the middle of the ocean or at the bottom of some river ravine most of the free weekends when folks are hanging out. So
Now, the kayaking that Jesse's exposed me to has been on calm lakes, calm rivers, calm
yeah, that's
streams.
that's most kayaking. Yeah, that's really what most people can and should do, and it is enjoyable for like kayaking gets this bad rep because most people who are exposed to it really only see the most challenging or sort of craziest things but there's so much kayaking and canoeing and paddling to be had, stand-up paddleboarding to be had, that is just get a bunch of splash and giggle fun.
Well, one of the pictures I saw of you online is dropping down a waterfall that looked like it was, I don't know, 50, 70 feet high.
The waterfalls are fun. They definitely put your body under more stress than some of the other things that you can do just upon impact. So I've never been someone who's run super tall waterfalls. The world record waterfall right now is about 189 feet. It was first run by Tyler Brandt, and that has still yet to be overtaken. And I would never even imagine sliding into the river above that size of a drop. So relative to what gets run and what happens today, my aspirations before that point turned to, other endeavors. And really my passion was kind of bringing other people through that transition, and then kind of experiencing the learning from other folks, and being that guide and being along for that transformation within them. That was actually the most exciting part for me. So you don't get a lot of that on the super tall drops. People kind of know what they're doing at that point, but
So,
it
so
is a exciting thing. I still run waterfalls, and I still surf big waves and still love it. I have two kids now, so I have to be a little bit more selective in my time away, and I have to make sure that I'm really on point. So I try to stay in shape, and I try to be sharp and practice my skills for those times that are a little fewer and further in between of taking the big trips. But when I am there, it still feels so right. So.
one of the like I said, one of the videos I saw was you just riding some tremendous waves, and it looked like a
Mm.
lot of fun. I'm not sure how long it takes to get to that place. And you'd mentioned that, this is sometimes life or death situation. And you
It
had
is.
your moment where, right, as part of a weekend, I think, where you were doing some training, where
Mm.
you ended up against a seawall.
It's true. Yeah, you heard that story. I have a number of kind of close encounter stories, all of which have worked out clearly, but it is all with a collection of their own learning. And so what often happens with these sort of near miss opportunities is people miss the true opportunity to get the learning from them. And each time you sort of trace back the steps and kind of figure out what in their decision making process really led to this. What was the things that were under the surface that were really motivating those actions? And it always comes back to like, well, all right, here's the circumstance. What was I really thinking about? What thoughts really influenced how I was feeling? Because ultimately, I decided to drop onto that wave heading towards the sea cliff because I was feeling something. And where did that feeling come from is probably what was my thought process. And looking back at the decisions and looking back at really not just the actions, but going deeper. What were the feelings and thoughts that preceded those? Is where often the true learning is, and the real sense for change, and hopefully not repeating that. But yeah, essentially, that was a scary experience, but one that we had all prepared for. The team and I knew what to do. There wasn't a whole lot of communication possible or required, and everybody snapped into action. And my good buddy Jamie Klein was there with the back of his boat, ready for me to climb on. Although kind of one-armed, climb onto the back of his boat within probably minutes, felt like hours.
I bet.
But we handled ourselves, and ultimately, when you operate in those sort of critical environments, whether it's the top of a mountain or out in the ocean like that, underwater, these critical environments are places where you're operating where calling 911 isn't a thing. You can do it, but it's going to take hours and tons of resources and putting a lot of other people at risk. You're kind of on your own in these places, and things go wrong. When they do go wrong, they go wrong quick, and you have to actually be self-contained and able to get yourself out without relying on outside forces or influences. And so when you do that and you're kind of self-contained in that way, there's a lot of freedom, there's a lot of responsibility, but there's a lot of things to be learned that apply to the business world and to everyday actions, which is some of the reasons why I hope to get our kids participating in, whether it's kayaking or not, something adventurous that tests them and puts them into these places where they can learn what they need about themselves to really bring that forward into the rest of their lives.
Well, you undersold the story a little bit, but we both know the story, so it makes sense. But
Mm.
you broke the kayak, your shoulder was dislocated, and you were stuck
Yeah.
underwater for quite a while. But I think what really stands out to me is the way you assessed yourself afterwards.
Mm.
You took, I think what you said is you own the decision. you put yourself in that spot, the things happen. And then afterwards, you didn't beat yourself up. You said, what could I have done different? What did I not read? Correct?
I did. Well, I ended up giving a presentation to the local sea kayaking community, and just kind of just being vulnerable and saying, here's all the places that I messed up. Um, I assume I can't curse on this show, but I definitely messed up big time. And so instead of hiding from that or making excuses or blaming the conditions or my buddies or anything else, just owning it and having that ultimate responsibility is uh, the only useful thing I could do. When you're in this sport, it's a team sport, but everybody is operating as their individual sort of captain of their own vessel, quite literally. And so um, there is that give and take, and ultimately we do make the decisions and work as a team, knowing that now my buddies are going to try to save me, and so how much do I want to put themselves at risk? But I also have to always keep in mind that the number one rule to safety and rescue is to not become part of the problem and to not make things worse. And so if they don't think they can get in there safely, they're not going to. And so there is that understanding, but it's all predetermined. Everybody already knows this. We've all been trained together, because there's not really time to go through the process analytically step by step. It all has to happen really fast. And so what works for that is sort of running through the mock scenarios, practicing it in conditions, like really going out and doing these things in the place you'd need them most, and putting the techniques or the things that we think will work to the actual test. Uh, and that ends up being the thing that really makes it possible to kind of do it fast enough and have it be successful at all.
What I'm kind of hearing as far as like applying it to business is being ready for the business you're getting into. Like a lot of people get in underfunded, underprepared,
Sure. Out of necessity sometimes.
Of course, but the better that you are prepared, the more likely you're going to succeed. And there's plenty of people who end up with the 911 and being carried out by the Coast Guard and all
Oh
that.
yeah.
But the more prepared we can be, the better we understand our business.
Yeah, and assume that you're going to mess up, and that's okay. Like there is, you have to put things in place and be ready for that. But if the idea is to always, so it's that feedback loop. Like we talked about, kind of analyzing that accident, doing a presentation for the local club, kind of looking at those decisions again, finding ways to have feedback loops, and that's part of coaching, right? That's part of getting that feedback. Sometimes you can do that for yourself, and having that feedback and knowing you're going to mess up is what's going to allow you to go to the next level. You can prepare all day, but what is it Mike Tyson said, the everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yep.
That's so true. And so it's more about just expecting that you're going to have those times, and preparing for that and applying that feedback loop so that you can at least improve based on those experiences.
And what's another quote? We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep,
And you see it
absolutely.
in
And in
boxing.
business, you can say in training, replace it with processes, and it's the
Mm.
same thing.
So you moved out here from Missouri. Did you go to Alder Creek immediately?
Well, yeah. So it was an interesting thing. I sort of heard about Alder Creek and knew where I wanted to go based on a conversation I had riding around with someone that I sort of idolized and sort of looked up to as the pinnacle of the sport at the time. I was living in St. Louis, working for an outdoor gear shop. The Alpine shop in St. Louis is about the only real specialty outdoor retailer there, certainly the only one that sold kayaks. So that's where I had to get a job right when I turned 16. And it was my job I might have been probably 17, maybe 18 at the time. And my job for this big film event that we were doing with Outside Magazine was to take the star of the film to the venues. So Scott Lindgren, who's just had a film released, everyone should check out, called The River Runner. It's on Netflix right now, produced by Rush Sturges. The River Runner is Scott's sort of story, but it was on that car ride riding around with Scott that I sort of shared my plans or my intentions about where I wanted to go, and I wanted to be a professional kayaker, and I'd love to go do a big river or some expedition like he had been doing. He was showing his film on the Yard Long Sang Po river expedition in the Himalaya, and just an incredible, mind-blowing feet still, and certainly at the time. So he immediately said, well, you're gonna have to quit your job, and you're gonna have to break up with your girlfriend, and you're gonna have to move away from your family, and you're gonna have to say goodbye to everything you know here in the Midwest, and you should go to one or two, maybe three places in the world to take your next step. And we named a place back east, probably closer to where you were from in Asheville, North Carolina. You can certainly become a professional kayaker training in those areas in Appalachia, but then also Northern California, which is where he cut his teeth, or Oregon. And he said if you go to Oregon, you should go work at Alder Creek, because they're the best at coaching new paddlers. You can work year round and get into the paddle sports world. And so I called up Alder Creek and started asking around, and found out that at the Alpine Shop, that outdoor store that I was working for, driving the film star around at, uh, had a coworker there who had managed that kayak shop, Alder Creek Kayak and Canoe. And I found that out and said, "Oh, can you send my resume in for me?" And so that was really the first connection. And I have to attribute it back to the Alpine Shop, and of course that conversation with Scott, and just the community, in that sense of those networking connections that are really based on relationships. And adventures in the outdoors form some of the tightest relationships you'll ever experience. So it's great for that.
And you helped build Alder Creek, right? You helped him
I
grow.
didn't. I mean, I helped him grow. It was up and running. It had changed ownership just after I'd started working there. So I was kind of hired on by the original ownership, and was one of the few employees that made the transition. And so it was a fresh start. And so it was a chance to sort of reclaim, what is our place in the market? What are we going to be known for? And with the resurgence of the energy, and a little bit more capital, operating capital from new ownership, and a new willingness to invest in the community, we really turned what was historically a really significant shop on the West Coast sort of back to its former glory and beyond, and took it from, I think when I was hired on, there was 4 or 5 employees, and to the point where there was 45 or so employees by the time I left, seasonally, of course. But it's really been amazing to see how many families have been spurred by the shop, including that's where I met my wife. There's been other marriages there. Dave and Susie, the current owners, are a fantastic couple as well. So it really serves as not just a job, but a real foundation for the community at large, and where I met a lot of my best paddling buddies, who really helped me get out and pursue the adventures and advance my paddling career the way I did. And so it all kind of stemmed from those initial steps, and sleeping on some couches out here in the Northwest, just hoping that I could land a gig kayaking somewhere, living the dream.
So you were coaching and training kayakers. You were giving, you were at
Running
symposiums. You're
events.
doing all kinds of
Yep.
things. How did you transfer those lessons into business coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say it was an easy, just obvious transfer, because it seems obvious now, but at the time it seemed like the craziest thing ever. It's like, okay, so I'm going to quit my job where I've got somehow managed to find a job with benefits and a salary kayaking, and and I got a kid on the way. I'm going to throw that into the air and just try to go be self-employed with this thing that I just learned about from a buddy. So that with no business degree and no real traditional, you know, business ownership experience. It seemed like a big leap, and I could understand why people would be like, how does that work? Um, there are so many concepts that transfer quite directly from facing fear to making big high stakes decisions in critical environments, to team dynamics and just developing your skills, and how to stay focused, how to set your mindset for doing a really difficult task that is all in, just like running a business is. But I really heard about it from a fellow kayaker and professional team member that was on the same boat manufacturer sponsorship team. So Piranha Kayaks, still my current boat favorite option. Uh, my buddy Rob and I were working an event together, and just over beers and hanging out in between the class session days on this weekend event. We got to chatting and just really hit it off. He was a coach out of Britain, which is where the boat manufacturer is based. And we sort of ended up at the same event a couple times at various places around the globe. And I invited him to my event, the Lumpy Water Sea Kayak Symposium that I ran for about 9 years out on the Oregon coast. And he wouldn't come back the next year. I invited him to my annual event. I was like, Rob, what is happening? Why don't you come back? I need you. Like we had a good time at the event. I thought. I mean, man, what did I say? And he said, no, it was great. I enjoyed you. The event was really well run. Like I'd like to come out, but I've been doing a lot of executive coaching, and this was 7 or 8 years ago. And I was like, yeah, Rob, tell me. I don't know what that is, but you should tell me all about it at my event. You should come and coach at. So I eventually talked him into it. He was like, all right, fine. So. Uh, I learned about what he was doing, and a similar story, taking his background and coaching people on the water and learning development and applying those concepts of leadership and teaching to the business context, working with professionals and executives. And I showed up to pick him up at the airport, and he's wearing like business slacks and like a belt, like a leather belt, and like shirt with sleeves. And I was like, what is happening to you? And so I was intrigued, and I started really wanting weekends off because I had the kid on the way, I wanted to start a family, and I didn't want that opportunity to have those weekend adventures with them slip away. So the next time I invited Rob back, he said, fine, but you have to let me teach you what I do and train you, because you'd be good at it, and I know that your family's growing. You need to do this. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And what we need to do is just get a class together, a certifying class. He developed a curriculum and a coach certification that he'd given, I don't know, several corporations and places down in South Africa and Johannesburg where he was working, and kind of certifying their leaders and coach training. And so I just needed to scrape a class together. And so I did that. And he came and we did a week-long certification program and a year-long mentorship program to begin with, and helped me kind of make that transition, apply a lot of the things I already knew how to do to helping people run their small businesses. And through that year, kind of whittled it down to commission-based earners and small business owners, because that's who I'd worked around and with my entire career previous to that in the outdoor industry. So there we are, and so that was 6 years ago. And sure enough, I liked it. Coaching is a lifestyle, and it's kind of a way of being more than an occupation. And so it felt natural to do that. I just had to wear like shirts with collars and things. And I had fewer days wearing sandals, but a lot more days, weekends off, and times with the family, and still getting those transformational moments. Because learning how to kayak a waterfall is transformational for somebody, but so is running a business. And it's really that transformation and being along for that ride that I was actually most fueled by in the end. So I think that's the thing that's at the core of it, really, is being that guide for them and helping them transform. And whether it's a business or a kayak, they're both great vehicles for that transformation.
So this just feels like such a wide range of people, and just the way you had to coach. There's obviously similarities, but there's differences. What are some of the myths of coaching that people have?
So a lot of times I hear one of the big sacred cows of coaching is that, a really good coach will hold you accountable. And I'll agree, like, I think that's true, but it shouldn't stop there. If I use the analogy or the sort of the comparison of being on a soccer team. So I'm an adult soccer team right now, and I still manage to like hobble out there and run up fast enough to keep up with the college kids that didn't join. But the thing about, like, if we had a coach and you had a soccer team out there, and the coach's only job was to gather the team around at the beginning of the game and say, okay, what's your goal? And the whole team says, we want to win the game. And the coach says, cool, okay, here's the plan. You're going to score more goals right over there than that team is, and you're going to do it before the end of the game. And at halftime, we're going to pause, and you're going to go off the field. We're going to do a session. I'm going to tell you whether you'd scored all those goals or not, hold you accountable to, because you said you're going to do that. That's the goal. I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And if you don't do it, you're going to hear about it. And I'm going to send you back out onto the field and do better. and I always laugh because that's effectively what a lot of coaches do. Like they become like cheerleaders, and they don't actually give you new frameworks, new skills, the feedback loop that you need to actually improve and see the game at a deeper level, and understand how to change and be uncomfortable and do things differently than you'd normally done them. If the job was so easy as to just hold people accountable, you could do that with an app, right? Like you just set a reminder and be like, did you do your push-ups today or whatever? So there's so much more to it, but I think people have this sacred cow sort of myth idea that that's a big part of it. Another one is that the coach that you have should have already done everything that you intend to do. Like that coach should be able to already do what you're doing. And I think that's maybe true, but look at coaches of elite level athletes setting world records. If they're setting a world record, clearly that coach has never been able to do that, right? So like at some point, you should be able to elevate your client, student, coachee to a level well beyond what you reached in your personal career, wherever that was. Now we do need to be able to have walked the walk. We need to enter as the guide into the story. We need to also have had the hero's journey ourselves, but it is not, doesn't even have to actually be in the same skill, because coaching is a different thing altogether than the actual sport activity, business you're running, whatever it is. And so one of those myths I hear sometimes from clients is they want to go and find a coach that's done exactly what they wanted to do. And I always sort of ask them like, well, do you want to do what somebody else has already done, or are you looking to do something new, or you're looking to do something that's something that you've personally never done? Because that's all that actually really matters. And the skill of coaching is going to allow someone who doesn't even do that thing to help you improve, because it's at a fundamental sort of core level of how humans operate. So those are a couple that I know and think of just right off the top of my head when you mentioned that.
So I've been at some, I've been lucky enough to be around some high producing agents, some high producing team leaders, listen to people up on stage, and I've got to be behind the curtain on some of these, and come to find
Really?
out it's not nearly as smooth and as structured as they claim up on stage.
It's very
So,
glossy and finished up front.
and this is where sometimes people get a little even that idea, well, I want to, someone who's done it, I need to be where they are. Well, there's some missing pieces where you don't know exactly how lucky they got, whether they got a $4 million loan from their dad and that's how they got where they went, or,
Right.
they're just a much better talker than you, or whatever it may be. And so, one guy was like, if, it's this, or this, I was like, okay, that's great. I like structure. That's really structured. And I happened to talk to someone who is in this top level mastermind in that company. I was like,
right.
Hey, I was hearing about how he did things. He doesn't do that. He's such a nice guy. He wouldn't he's not firing anyone because they didn't do a deal that month. I was like, what? Mm-hmm. Then there's another guy who was acting all tough with his people, like with leads. If they don't call them, they do this.
Right.
And I was like, hey, I need to talk to you. I want to hear about this tough love.
How do you make this happen? Yeah.
Like, what about this? And he goes, well, it's not all the time. I was like, wait, what's going on here? And I have a video that I found with Paul Rudd. You ever watch the Hot Ones YouTube?
No,
where they eat the hot wings? Well,
I've seen like wing contests and things like that. I know what you're talking about, but no, I haven't seen that one.
So he's on there and he's getting interviewed, and he goes, I have the story, and I'm not sure if it's actually the story that really happened, or if I've told it so many times that it morphs.
It does. Every time we go back over memory, we recreate the memory and reburn a new past in a different way where it becomes the new memory.
And so I've kind of gone off a tangent from where we were exactly on that, but be careful when you're looking at those people that you're trying to strive to be, because the stories are not
right.
There's things are getting filled in. And so when you're, I just need that person who,
well, the story, right? Like there's that story in your head about what's actually happening versus the reality of it. And, our brain's going to operate on whatever story you concoct. And I've come to realize later and later, and longer and longer I've lived, the more I learned that it's like, you actually have a choice. Like you can make it one story or the other that you can tell yourself. Neither one is probably the absolute accurate reality or truth.
Right.
But which one makes you happier? Which one brings the better version of you to the surface? Maybe that one's the better story, whether it's, the most accurate or not. Sometimes sometimes you can choose that on purpose and have a better outcome intentionally. And I think people forget that. They sort of become victims of their story rather than the builders or constructors
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. No, that's true. What about the myth of, I guess it's kind of a myth. Some people see trainers as coaches. What's your
Trainers
take
and
on,
coaches.
do you see a difference between training and coaching?
I do. I mean, and there certainly is a difference if you apply it to the sports world, right? Like there's a certain level of strategy and kind of bigger picture outlook that comes with coaching, and maybe even the more financed, more um, minute or sort of uh, I can't think of the word, but the sort of smaller detail kind of feedback items as well. And the trainer seems to be more of the let's do the repetitive actions and do the work in between the sessions or the work in between the encounters with the coach that help you progress, but don't necessarily offer as much new direction, big picture, or small feedback on what actually needs to change. And so, as coaches, you need to be able to do a little bit of both, I think. But I think with coaching, there comes a certain level of that extra strategy. Um,
Yeah, I see it as like, here's the tool to use, and here, kind of like an artist. Hey, here's some
right.
paints and some and a brush. And the
Hmm.
coach is more about how to make it turn out to be the thing versus the skill. I don't know.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
how
Yeah.
to
The
think.
technique that's
Coaches
underneath
teach
it.
people how to think, right?
Right. Not as opposed to what to think. That's true. Absolutely. And if the good coaches will, of course, hold their advice monster back, and let their client kind of explore and do the thinking, but offer them things that challenge that thinking, and get them doing it in a way that's constructive so that they do get to their outcome, whatever that may be. Sometimes it's harder than others. You just want to tell them what the answer is. Just do this,
That
but they have to own
is,
the result.
yeah,
You know.
it's so much easier when it comes from them.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's buy-in, right? And there's a willingness to really fully put both feet in and see it through when it's their choice. I always like to use on the river. This is where it started. Was challenge by choice. Challenge by choice. You'd have a class full of kayakers and different opportunities to run different lines on the river or go through different spaces out in the ocean. Or do you want to go through this archway or do you want to paddle around? This one is a challenge by choice. Sometimes you encounter some challenges that are not a choice in those environments, but it's
Yeah.
good to remember that it's challenge by choice here, and that way you own the results, you own the outcome. It's not just somebody telling you what to have done and it happened to have worked that once. You have the actual journey to go along with it.
You've not jumped, that's the wrong word to say with kayaking. You've
It
propelled
felt like a
yourself
jump.
off a water
Propelled. Nice. I see what you did there.
off a waterfall. You've gone on these massive waves. You've been slammed up against seawalls. You've been probably in many hairy situations.
Mm.
In in kayaking and in business, how do you teach people to manage their fear? And let's lean more on the business side because that's who's probably lists this a lot more than kayakers. But how do you manage the fear of putting yourself out there, of failing in front of your peers, rejection, any of that stuff? How do you coach people on that?
Yeah. Well, I think what a lot of people feel is the resistance to fear. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that they what they really feel is that forced, blocked, stuck feeling where they're trying to resist the fear. And I've always tried to instead call it reframing, call it embracing it, letting it flow. I just like when I would go to look at a rapid, and I would teach someone to scout a rapid. You're going to get out of your kayak at the top of a rapid and walk along the shore, clamber around and climb down to where you can see the hardest places, the hardest moves, all the things that could go wrong are laid out before you. And that's when, your palms get the most sweaty. You start to dry out, you can't spit anymore. You start to have the real fear and the real issues there. And I like to just let it roll right through me and actually experience the fear and acknowledge it, appreciate it, and then call it excitement. And I start talking about it. I start using the words. I start, hey, nudge the guy next to me. I'm like, I'm so stoked right now. I'm so excited. This is going to be really fun. And if asked right in that moment if I was afraid, I'd be like, Yeah, yes, yes. I am definitely afraid, but I'm also so excited because it's really the same feeling. It's just how you're interpreting it, right? And so, I would definitely encourage folks to, in that moment, like go and scout it out. Go be there and actually think through, all right, what are, and we do this, we get plan B and plan C. You want to stay online and make plan A happen, and that's the smoothest route down this rapid. But if that move, I miss that one, where do I end up? What's going to be my plan B? And like really experience and feel the fear there as opposed to blocking it, so that you can run its course. Fear is not one that you can like dance around or under or go over. Like you have to go through it. And that means going through the experience of it physiologically. So the dry mouth, the sweaty palms, the shaking voice, like all of it, like embrace it, experience it, let out a war cry, like have fun with the full experience of the human spectrum of emotion and just be there with it. And then as you walk upstream, control yourself, calm down, pay attention to your breathing, turn inward, think about your line and only plan A. This is what's going to happen, and visualize it in a positive way. And there is no bad lines during visualization. There is no, you've already done it. You've already done that game down there. You had the experience. You know what's going to go wrong if it goes wrong, but it's only going to go right at that point. And so teaching people that skill of letting yourself go there and experience that heightened level of arousal or fear, whatever that emotion is, and then how to bring it back, how to activate that parasympathetic nervous system and go, you know, instantly when you need to go back to a place where you can use the fear because it makes you sharper and quicker, but not let it overtake and overwhelm and stop you. And so those are the things that I always recommend. Let it flow, and then transition.
I love that perspective, and I haven't really heard that one. The resistance of the fear is what you're feeling mostly.
Mm. Man, it lasts so much longer. What is it? Seneca said we more often suffer in our imagination than we do in reality, right? So it's sort of that. I mean, it's going there, experiencing it, contemplating it. Okay, and then call it stoicism, call it whatever. But it's most people are too afraid to experience the emotion, and so they just end up resisting, and it makes it end up coming back time and time again, and it just lasts longer, and it almost ingrains that path in their brain to that emotion because you're just wearing that groove into the entrance point, but never actually going through the door and getting over with it.
I think it's like the longer that you go, I'm scared, I'm not going to do it. I'm scared. The time going on, whether that's hours, minutes, weeks, years, decades, it reinforces you didn't do it and you lived. And it's like the dog that barks at the mailman going, why are you yelling at me? I've protected you from this mailman for 15 years. Because the mailman's never come in. They've never had to meet the mailman. And that's exactly what you're talking about is go to the fear, feel the fear. Absolutely. And do it anyway.
I talked about scouting the rapid, right? Walking down and looking at it. And there's some rapids you know that you shouldn't run because you've been staring at it for an hour. Like it's not the right time. Like if you had to sit there and wait that long, like that's fine. Like let it go, walk around it, and then go approach it next time differently, because that's a really good sign that like maybe it isn't a good idea. And it isn't always a good idea to actually do the thing and run the rapid. But if you have to stare at it that long, it doesn't increase your performance. Often the longer, it said that it is a direct correlation. The longer I stare at a hole in the river, like a hydraulic or a big feature that's going to eat me, the longer I stare at it, the more time I'm going to spend in it.
Oh no.
There's a direct relationship.
I saw one of your videos and it looked like you were in a thing. I was like, I don't want to be in that. You were, it almost looked like a little whirlpool the way they're coming in. I couldn't tell. It was just
whirlpool
from the
It was a whirlpool that was bigger across than the sea kayak is long, which is about 16 to 18 feet there. So it's that one I sat next to for probably an hour. And that was just a big whirlpool off of the edge of a cliff on a big tidal rapid where the tide literally changes almost 50 feet. And it creates just a massive current that rips around this corner. And the circular turbulence created by the corner of this cliff wall opens up massive whirlpools that then travel downstream and dissipate. And when the tide's dropping, they become less and less powerful. So when we first got there, they were horrendous. And we just sat in the calm water relatively calm water next to them behind the cliff wall, kind of in a large eddy or sort of resting space. And we just stared into the abyss of these giant whirlpools for about an hour until about half hour in, I started holding my breath and waiting how long they were dissipating and seeing if I could actually hold my breath long enough. Because go there, right? Like let yourself feel the
Sure.
fear. What's the worst case scenario as I come out of my boat and I get sucked to the bottom of this whirlpool? Who knows what happens to my eardrums? And I have to hold my breath for, I don't know. So I started holding my, and I realized after, about a half an hour, I could just about hold my breath that long. And so started dropping into these whirlpools and letting them play with the boat and see what they did. And it took a lot of decision making there, but it helped, kind of boiled frog style, because eventually, just staring at the giant whirlpools as they dissipated, it didn't seem so bad, as I just slowly kind of eased into the idea, holding the breath and kind of seeing them for a while. I kind of desensitized myself to their horrendous appearance, but it made for a really cool shot from above, from the
Oh,
bridge
it
just
did.
above there. It's not something I aspire to do again.
I got two more questions for us as time's running out.
Sure.
One that came up with that when we're going in during that line is, how do you judge when you're talking to someone and they're making their plans, ego versus confidence? I imagine that there's a bunch of ego driven people in the kayaks. I can do this. I'm going to jump in the water. I'm going to go higher in the class rapids than I should. In
Mm,
business, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to kill it because I'm whatever.
yeah.
How do you coach people on, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if it's fair to be realistic, but just that ego getting ahead of them and they just aren't really attuned to reality,
Mm, yeah.
or that they are prepared, like just overconfident in a situation they shouldn't be overconfident in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a few things jump into my brain there. There's just like a self-awareness there that has to happen, right? And we all fall victim to the trap of Kruger Dunning, in that the more that we tend to learn, the more we realize we don't know. And so as we can be blissfully ignorant in our abilities and competency levels quite often, and not even realize it. So ego and confidence, right? Like one seems like true and real and has substance and stands up to test, and one kind of falls by the wayside and is facade and more fault. Like I forget who it was. If it was Simon Sinek or somebody else, kind of describing or talking about the idea of confidence in like pouring a glass of water at a table. And so like if you're truly confident in your ability to do that, and one time you absolutely spill the glass all over the top of the table, you don't go around feeling like, oh my God, I'm no good at pouring water. Like you just
Mhm.
chalk it up as to like, that's a mistake, whatever. I'm still good at, you're still confident in your ability to do that. You'll do it in front of people. You're from, no problem at all. Whereas if it's an ego thing, if you're sort of pretending to be good at it and that thing happens, you're crushed.
Right.
It is something that's devastating
Mm,
and attached to your like identity somehow,
mm,
as opposed to just a one-off sort of mistake or accident. And so uh, what's behind that glass of water being poured and that confidence, it's having done it a bunch of times and spilling a bunch of times. And it's hard to, like, people want to kind of short path that feeling of confidence often, and it's um, I think you're sort of shortchanging yourself the opportunity for the journey of getting there. People would sign up for the kayaking symposiums, the classes, and we'd ask them what they most wanted to learn, and often the confidence would come up. We want to learn to be confident out there. And then, so what we would do, we would put them in a fear to fun class, fear to fun in the surf, where we would basically put them out there in the surf with no boat or paddle, and just teach them to swim in the ocean and just fall on their face, splash around, get wet, put their head underwater. Because in your kayaking, it's like it's the worst thing if you fall over and flip over and you just have to swim in the ocean. So like, let's just go do it. Let's just go like get confident with that, and then we give them a paddle. They swim around with a paddle, a big paddle, like they have big paddle hands, and they do that. They have a great time, and they're just feeling more and more confident in their fundamental skills, and they're just completely falling on their face the whole time, like literally, like tripping over the thing, falling in the water, having it like, splashing, like having a good time being bad at it and it being fine. And then we put them out there in their boat and we take their paddle away. And we were like, all right, cool, keep your boat upright. You're just gonna fall, and just get them used to falling out of their boat upside down. Like, what do you do when this happens? Cool, now you're confident failing that way. Great. Like by the time you have them with their boat and their paddle and everything sitting out in the ocean, They're like, "Man, I failed 6 waves from Sunday already with half this amount of gear helping me. Like, this is easy." And so like that's now they're truly feeling confident, but they couldn't just shortchange it, right? They couldn't like
Right.
take the class, stay upright the whole time, and suddenly feel like they're confident at this thing, much less competent. So
Right.
and there's a whole difference there as well. But yeah, I think it's like your willingness to fall on your face publicly and feel that that sort of sense of failure and be okay with it. That's what true confidence really is, right? Because when you spill the glass of water and you fail and everyone sees you do it, you're like, you're okay with it. Like you may be a little embarrassed, but like whatever, it's not a big deal because you're willing to fail publicly. And if you can do that, that's kind of where a true confidence. So like, don't again, don't resist it. Don't like try to just like the fear thing. Like just go through it. Just fail publicly and be okay with it. If you can do that, that's how you learn to be confident.
I love that. So tell us a little bit about Business Made Simple coaching.
Right. Yeah. Well, so like we kind of talked about, like a lot of coaches become cheerleaders, and you sort of reach a sort of into the new ideas or frameworks. Business Made Simple University is a really robust online learning platform that we've put together with Donald Miller and JJ Peterson at the helm. And Don is the author of Building a Story Brand, as well as Marketing Made Simple and Business Made Simple, and Dr. JJ helped him with those second two. But there is so many new, highly produced, well polished online learning modules that I think rival any MBA as far as the level of knowledge you actually need to run a business and grow a business. It's there, and it's there for under $300 a year. And
Mm,
so I take my clients through modules on Business Made Simple University as the learning and curriculum and new frameworks that they're going to need in order to reach those goals that I'm holding them accountable to. And so it's really the combination of the training with the coaching that gets the result that we really want. So that Business Made Simple University is the reps, it's the training, it's the new knowledge, it's the thing that they're going to get better at in between the sessions, so that we can then direct that new knowledge to strategic goals that they're going to do in their business.
I love that. That's great. Well, this has been a blast, and the time went by so much faster than I wanted it to.
I know we'll have to do it again. It was definitely
Absolutely.
always a fun conversation.
If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Sure. Yeah. So tributarycoaching.com is my website. You can reach me there. That's probably the most efficient way to get a hold of me and kind of see more of what we do.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Until next time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Bye.